Now, I'm going to move into a little bit into the basics of how I would master this. So mastering at its core is kind of just bringing up volume levels to industry standard, but there's way more to mastering than that. And good mastering engineers are good mastering engineers for a reason. But essentially what I would do as an easy master is there's a couple different ways to do this. So I'll just show you a few of the different ways that I would do it. In my early beginning stages, what I would do is Ozone Elements it's free a lot from iZotope. Otherwise, I think it's like $50 or something. It's gonna create like a default mastering chain for you with intelligent AI. To be honest with you, it's intelligent, but it's intelligent. My experience with it and other people's experience with it is that it will make some outlandish, large sweeping moves about things that it doesn't need to do. I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to put Ozone on here and show you guys how it's going to react. So the general rule with Ozone is you have it listen to like the loudest part of the piece. So I'm just going to have it listen to this latter half, and it's going to master things for us. Then I'm going to build like a simple mastering chain that I would do anyway. So let me just get Ozone. This is the full version of Ozone, but Elements does the same thing. So then I'm just going to go to the AI mode, hit play. So you see what it did here is it detected this track as pop. And so it put on all of these parameters that would be for a pop track. And you hear how it got like way louder, and now the whole thing sounds like a brick wall, right? Like it sounds like a compressed brick wall. So, and you can even see the brick wall-y nature of it on my master bus, which I think my camera's covering up. But if right? So it's definitely brick walling. This is not pop, so it shouldn't brick wall. So I would do cinematic if I'm doing something like this. So I'd probably go to a cinematic default. It's gonna sound very different. And we're actually basically hitting the frequency curve spot on. Sorry, I realized our camera wasn't on. Basically hitting the frequency curve spot on. It made some small adjustments, which actually this is some of the smallest adjustments I've ever seen Ozone do, which is kind of a good thing. It kind of means that this arrangement and this mix is pretty much spot on for that thing. And so then what it would do is as impact, imager, clarity, stabilizer, dynamic EQ. This is a lot of information. I'm just going to give you a very quick rundown. Impact is how hard basically the transients are going to hit in certain regions. For me, I always want my impacts hitting in the low frequencies and lower this stuff a little bit. Imager is your stereo image. This is actually really important. Really weird for it to bring up the stereo image of the low frequencies. That's actually almost a completely wrong move here. When I hit play, the lows should be centered and this stuff should be boosted. But you can actually see your stereo image here about how wide and everything is. Clarity is smart, intelligent, like EQ response. Typically adds high frequencies. Stabilizer, similar. And so it does a lot of different things for you. The dynamic EQ has never actually been that intelligent to me. And then it has the maximizer, which is kind of the most important part so it's doing upward compression, which you can see here, if it wants to tell me. Okay, I thought typically it gives you a description. But it's going to basically, we're bringing up the overall gain, and then upwards compression, we're bringing up the quiet stuff and making it loud and all that kind of stuff to try to get like a brick wall. And the general idea here is we want to hit what is called LUFS, L-U-F-S. For all streaming platforms and stuff, you want to have generally like negative 14 LUFS at least in order to sound good on them. So if I pulled up Insight, I think it'll probably show me somewhere on Ozone too, but I don't know where. Insight is a metering plugin. That's just going to show me. Yeah, like at our loudest point, we're hitting like -9. So we're super, super loud, right? So that's one way to do a very quick master if you don't want to have to think about it. The other things that I would do in mastering chains, I would start with an EQ. And as it plays, I would watch the EQ to get the general idea of what's happening and if there's any problem frequencies I see. Overall, this curve looks like a good curve. That's kind of what you want. The human hearing range is approximately this curve in a sense, because we hear more of this, so you want less of this, and we hear less of this, so you want more of that, and we want this hitting our subs really hard so we feel it. That's a quick rundown of it, basically. So I'm going to let it play. Typically, in this situation, I would cut out some things before I get to my last compression and stuff. Maybe do some dynamic EQs on response here. And in fact, for this, I actually think my lows are a little bit too high, so I would actually bring them down a bit. Then I would probably do some kind of bus compression. This is working a little bit too hard in my opinion. I think I would want that hitting only when the big percussion hits. You can bring it up if you want. I would typically do a tape saturation. Tape saturation is going to glue everything together for you. So tape saturation basically makes it sound like everything's running through tape. It adds a little bit more of that saturation that we were talking about earlier. So it's going to glue everything together, similar to how putting everything in the same reverb glues it all together. It's hitting, now my levels are hitting my master too much. And so that's probably because all of my gain staging before is too much. As a simple quick fix, I would probably not do this always, but sometimes I actually do this because there are no rules in mixing and mastering, and don't get mad at me. But some engineers would tell me this is crazy. I should fix my levels beforehand, and I think I agree. But if I lower this, the input gain into the master, the overall how it's going to hit my compressor and my tape saturation is going to be slightly different. So it's not just absolutely smashing it. I can also change the input here, so it's hitting it differently, and change the output there. So we're basically level managing and mastering. I am not a mastering engineer, but we're basically level managing, gluing things together. That's the general idea of mastering. So right now we are at, with that short, very simple process, we're at -14. So other things I would do, I would probably add in something like another EQ, like a dynamic EQ. Just, again, cutting out more problem frequencies. We can actually look at what our whole thing looks at now. Again, this is very basic stuff that we're doing. I'm not doing all the complicated. I would probably use multi-band EQs a lot here and stuff. So we've got that. Then I would probably have another limiter or compressor. I would just here maybe bus compressor. That's hitting too hard. You would do like a limiter. I've heard some people talk about clippers in their mastering chain. To be honest, I don't super know how a clipper hits the whole master, so I'm not going to go deep into that. But the general idea is you want your output hitting -14 LUFS. So frequently what I actually practically do is I frequently have an EQ here to control anything before it hits ozone. I will often have a compressor here before it hits ozone. In this situation, I don't think I need to. And I definitely have a tape saturation before it hits ozone. And then from there, even after it hits ozone and maximizes, I'll often have a dynamic EQ after it. And then I'll have my metering. And so I would actually go with what is in ozone plus some additional stuff. That's a typical way that I would do this. I don't like all the upward compression going on, so I'll boost the gain, but I don't want the upward compression happening as much. It's kind of like destroying my mix. I want less of that guitar. Less reverb on that percussion hit. So that's my mid percussion. So I want my mid percussion to hit a little bit less on the reverb. I'm just gonna lower that overall. I just want a little bit more winds and brass, I think, overall. Maybe just winds. Yeah, and I think we've got a roughly good start to a mix and master there. There's so much more I would do in a real setting. To me, the important things is I want to make sure this transition hits really hard. I would also want to make sure that the, I think my velocities on this isn't great, so I'd probably bring up these velocities because that is the top line. There was some fakeness about it to me. Even that, like even on those note transitions, we can bring those up. So I'd probably have them D-bow right there. Oh, maybe not. Maybe I want that transition. I just want a little bit later. I need to emphasize it a little bit. Yeah, it's okay. I'm gonna copy those same settings that I just did there. You see how when you're doing this kind of stuff, like the mix process and the production are all very similar because you can orchestrate your way into a good mix, which actually I think we proved here. I think we actually started on a pretty good mix because of deorchestration, but you can't really mix your way out of a bad orchestration. And so even now I'm like fixing little notes, fixing modulation, fixing expression, fixing all the different things to really make this happen. I never even adjusted this. This big fat bass, I think, needs to be louder. Oh, more of that. Yeah, that's pretty cool. From an arrangement standpoint, there's a few things here. Now that we're done, now that we've mixed all the different things, I'm not going to fully flesh out this track and fully mix it. From an arrangement standpoint, there's a few different things that I don't love. So I'll just go through it and admit it. So this section from bars 23 through 30, I think it needs more action. Like we need more motion and rhythm going on. And so it might be smart for me to just add more percussion or something interesting. This motion is very dull once we got to it. Like there's a clear melody, but there's not something really grabbing my attention. And I want something there grabbing my attention. And so I don't know exactly what that would be. Maybe it would be bringing these up. I actually probably would be bringing those up because those are like the interesting motion that's happening. So I wonder if I brought those up. Let's just see. Maybe something like that, maybe. But everything else I think is working quite well. So yeah, I hope that helps in terms of like, there was a lot here in what we did for all of the different mixing and details. And again, there's way more of what I would be doing. Chances are I would be doing in the future, I would be doing dynamic EQs responding to the certain frequencies of different registers. So I would have, like my low brass, for example, my low brass, I would probably have them dynamically respond to the violin one, really just the high strings in general. But violin one, legato probably, and I would probably have them cut a little bit around here in the area of like 2 to 6K, which is really where clarity and stuff comes from, so that it gets out of the way of the melody. I would probably do that quite a bit. And so what I'm doing is I'm sidechaining it to that, telling it to react. And so you'll see if I do something like that, let's just put it on. Where did I actually put this? So I have this on low brass, and it should be responding to violin one legatos, right? Am I tripping? It's not, I see what's happening. It's over here. Yeah. The violin one legato thing was set to 0 or negative, so it needs to be right there. So essentially, so I would do stuff like that throughout to make everything more dynamic. So like every time the violin plays a note strongly, these frequencies of the low brass are going to react to the note. You can see them reacting. We could go really extreme with it if we wanted. You can see them reacting to it. Basically getting out of the way of that frequency space, because that's what mixing is. Mixing is putting everything into its right place so that everything can be heard, including frequency spaces, panning, in the verbs, all of the different things. So I would definitely do way more of that kind of stuff if I was really mixing this. And truthfully, if I was really mixing this and this was my piece of music, I would probably go back in and change some production choices too, like I was mentioning before, between measures 23 to 30, because I don't often commit myself to a production and then just go mix, because of the fact that orchestration determines more of the mix than you think it does. And so if I'm missing something, sometimes I have to adjust my production to compensate. This is the same thing when someone else gives me stems to mix. Sometimes I will secretly hide in different instruments into their mix to compensate for it. A really good example would be double bass legatos, low notes. Oftentimes you can just get like a sine wave, like a really low synth bass, and double that, and it's going to add some of that beef, some of that sub to your double basses that may not have them, because some sample libraries really have the sub frequencies, some really don't. So there's production choices and orchestration choices that you can do to beef up a mix and make a mix happen, and not just have mixing be EQ, compression, reverb, saturation, distortion, limiting, all of the different things on your own side. You can actually do a little bit of production stuff. Now, if someone sends you a production and they want you just to mix it, and they specifically say don't add anything or whatever, you may not be able to do that. But from my experience, oftentimes I end up doubling things and adding things. And if it's an orchestral thing, sometimes I'll double their orchestral library with my own orchestral library, because I know mine contains some frequency space that theirs doesn't. Maybe theirs is really bright, maybe mine is really warm, which is true for BBC. And so it's like I can complement that for the mix purpose by layering and adding and adjusting all of those different things. So there's a lot to mixing, but generally the idea is get things out of the way of each other and bring up dynamic, or reduce your dynamic range at least to some extent. In film scoring and stuff, you reduce it a tiny bit. Oftentimes the dynamic range on film scoring is huge, but generally it's getting things into their place and getting a blended sound, which I think we have here. So let's just go ahead and listen to it. And actually, before we do this, let me check our master level. Yep, we're hitting way above -14. We're going to be fine if we release this on Spotify today, which we're not going to. But yeah, let's just have a listen. Yeah, so that's working. Again, production-wise, I'm kind of annoyed at myself because I want to add more percussion in different spots. And actually, one of the things that I was fighting is every time this came in, it was too loud at the beginning. And then, like, I was adjusting it on the bus level of the mid percussion, realized it's only this that was too loud. So really, I'm just going to lower that. Yeah, much better. Much, much, much better. So yeah, that is orchestral, hybrid orchestral mixing, or orchestral mixing in a nutshell. Thanks for watching.